All right, let's move on to round number 5, where we're going to talk about some news that was longly needed. And this is a more serious topic for sure.
Yeah, way overdue. So yesterday, will be 2 days ago now, if you're listening to this, President Biden signed an executive order to, and this is a tweet from him. He said, "Today, I signed an executive order to strengthen how our military justice system addresses several forms of gender-based violence and added sexual harassment as an offense under the UCMJ in honor of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen." I know everybody knows this story at this point, but I'm just going to kind of recap some things really quick. Calls for justice in the killing of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen have been partly answered as relatives, lawmakers, celebrities, and advocates celebrate the passage of the Am Vanessa Guillen Act to help protect victims of sexual violence in the military. "The best way to honor my sister was having history being made in her honor, in her memory," said Myra Guillen, Vanessa's older sister. Vanessa Guillen, 20 years old, was a private first class at Fort Hood, Texas. She was last seen in a parking lot at the base in April 2020. Her dismembered remains were found near the base 2 months later. She was promoted to specialist posthumously. Guillen's family said she had told relatives and colleagues at Fort Hood, which had some of the highest rates of murder, sexual assault, and harassment in the Army. That place was known as the Wild West, essentially. It was a mess. But she had told people that she had been sexually harassed there. And watching interviews with the family, they said her mood had changed. She had been so enthusiastic about the Army. They could tell something was going on, and they could tell that something wasn't right. Key parts of the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act became law after they were included in the $770 billion National Defense Authorization Act, which got signed December 27th. It includes criminalizing sexual harassment under the UCMJ, improving how certain officials respond to sex-related offenses through independent investigations, and removing the decision to prosecute sexual misconduct cases from the service members' chains of commands. I'll get into that in a second, but that is something that we were desperate for over a decade ago when I was in, that I know other women were desperate for, and men, decades and decades before I was in.
And it makes no sense, because in a civilian police department or civilian, like, same type of situation, you would never do that, because you would have jurisdiction. Like you could not have that, because the jurisdiction would overlap, and you would have to recuse yourself from those investigations whenever you have a conflict of interest. And there was conflict of interest inside of the command whenever you have somebody that's in the command that's already doing that, especially if that person is in a leadership position and they're the ones being accused of it.
And undue command influence.
It would be like if something so horrific and personal happened to you, and sometimes with someone else in the unit, and you have to go to their friends, their own friends, their
people
own
that they golf
leaders,
with and shit. Yeah,
their own, and you have to tell them every horrific little detail that happened to you over and over, knowing every command is gossipy, so many commands are toxic, whatever, and you knowing that they're not going to do it right, and having to put your business out there.
Because even if the command is quiet, you still have to walk past the E2s and E3s and the admin office that are going to know why you're in there with an appointment that's going to be set in staff meetings and shit like that. What's the update?
Scuttlebutt and gossip.
So next thing you know, everybody fucking knows your business. And that, and no one in the military, woman, man, whoever, they don't want that on them. Like, you don't want to be known as the person making that. It's almost odd that it is odd. It's fucked up that the way that the accuser is almost looked at worse and sometimes than the person who actually did the heinous act.
And so many times, again and again and again, from my own friends that I served with, I saw this happen. It happened too many times. They were the ones removed from the unit. The victim was the one removed. The victim was the one punished. The victim was the one who got shit on by everybody. And then they had to live with that on their own, in their own quiet little corner, while life went on as usual for the perpetrator. And nothing happened to them oftentimes. Like it's just, and this is all because of failures within chains of command. Like, to me, I was sitting thinking about this last night, and like I teared up with like anger that it's just happening now. And again, I'll get into a second. Back to the story. From the attorney for the Guillen family said, "Our soldiers are protected with freedom, rights, and protections they never had before. We lost Vanessa, but we gained rights for our military and our service members. The new law excludes commanders from being involved in military sexual harassment or assault investigations by directing them to request independent investigations within 72 hours of receiving formal complaints from members of the armed services."
And I think that's too long. I don't
I think
it
so
takes-
too. I was
don't
shocked
think it
by
takes
72 hours
72
too.
hours is way too long.
Yep.
Should be 24.
The commanders must also forward the complaints to their next superior officer's chain of command, who are authorized to convene general courts martial. To enforce further oversight.
So what that means there is it either has to be a regimental level colonel or it has to be a brigadier general is where it's going. Somebody
Because
who
so
has the
many
ability to
times
convene a
too,
court-martial.
another problem with the way the system was before, and this is besides sexual assaults too, a lot of times it's called keeping things in-house.
Mhm.
They didn't want this information to go any higher because they could put it under the rug because it would make them look bad. And so these assaults, these horrific things would get swept under the rug.
The
and
court-martial authority is very important because that can't pass two lines of command. Where before you could say a captain was the company commander and that was a line of command, and the next one up from his or her chain of command would be the colonel that was involved, the battalion level commander, and
a lieutenant colonel at that.
Yeah, it could be a lieutenant colonel too, or major. I mean, you could have so many different things happen, but now it has to go to somebody who actually can convene a court martial. So that's going to be somebody with significantly more authority.
Yes, and to enforce further oversight, the law also creates a mechanism to track allegations of retaliation by victims of sexual misconduct and moves prosecutorial decisions in cases involving retaliation to special prosecutors. So now too, this retaliation I was talking about, where it's the victim who ends up having it the worst in the end, that's going to be looked at too. And hopefully that's going to be stopped. Another thing, they're going to look back again at the SHARP program, which clearly it's not working. Clearly it's not working. There's going to be a process by which service members can make claims for negligence. And
before we get into
damages.
what the legislation actually does, I want to kind of address why this needed to take place and why what was currently in the UCMJ is not enough. Because you have general articles, there's so many different crimes and grievances that take place in the UCMJ that were covered under these general articles. Now, when you have a specific statute, it lays out exactly what the elements of the crime are and what the punishments for those crimes are. So, for instance, murder in the UCMJ, you have the elements of the crime which need to take place in order for it to be considered murder, and then it has a set of punishments that go along with it. When you don't have a specific statute, it gives the commander so much more authority to grant lesser sentences because there is no mandatory minimums for a civilian criminology. You don't have that place. They can just say, this is what's going to happen. You don't have, for this crime, this needs to take place. You could get away with it essentially in a lot of ways.
You remove that ambiguity and you take a lot of it out of that commander's hands to an extent.
Which it should not be in their hands anyways.
Right. Another thing that's going to fall under this too is holding people more accountable for looking at Marines United when all these, the Marines had a hard drive that they would all share with photos and stalking and awful things of other fellow Marines. And looking at that, and they pretty much, for the most part, they all just kind of got away with it. Nothing happened to anybody. They weren't held accountable in any way. And that's going to fall underneath this too. Like the sharing of images and stuff like that kind of harassment is going to fall under it too. And they're going to establish trained sexual harassment investigators, again, outside the chain of command. And at least when I was in, boy, did they need training in general.
And this shit, what you're talking about right now, Kate, is so important, like the sharing aspect, because that's when, obviously sexual assault and harassment in and of itself are very detrimental. But in military community, when that happens and there's picture evidence or there's pictures of revenge porn thing, that completely ruins somebody's self-esteem, self-respect, their ability. And it shouldn't be that way because you didn't do anything wrong. If you had your pictures taken that you shared with a partner, that's totally on you. There's nothing wrong with sharing with your partner. When somebody else does something that's despicable and shares without consent your pictures, you've been wronged in that way. And and it's hard as a Lance Corporal, as a PFC, as a young apprentice in the Navy, being in that position and being able to go to your command and say, these are the things that are happening to me, is difficult. Recently, just this week, there was a Tennessee lawmaker who she's a state legislator in Tennessee. And she talked about how somebody hacked into her Apple iCloud and found pictures of her and held her essentially hostage and ransom about different bills that she wanted to pass and things like that. And she said that it was so scary and so overwhelming. I didn't know what to do because I am a mother, I'm a wife. I didn't want people to have those pictures of me. I'm a public person, and having that out there would have been embarrassing for me. But she stepped up and took it to the state legislator and made that a crime now, like to do that, to blackmail and to have that, and to go after public officials. And it seems like that's what's happening here, is that they're finally catching the elements of what really is part of the toxic culture in the military, and they're saying fucking no more. If you share this shit, you're going to get fucked too.
Yeah, and I'm just, you know, part of me is disappointed that it took this long. I think not anyone, but I think a lot of people looking on this from the outside would look at this and say, wait, that wasn't already how it was in the military, and would be shocked to find out that this legislation has to now spell all of this out.
But you know who I would say is not shocked? I would say every woman who's ever put on the uniform is not shocked.
Absolutely. No. You're right. Absolutely. I think it's good to take a microscope to our military. I think so many people in the military, veterans, and in our country in general, have a very rosy perception of our military, that it's excellent. And I'm very proud of our military, and I think it's a very proud organization. But no organization is without fault or without things that they need to work on. And that goes for the Army and the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard too. So the fact that this change is happening is somewhat refreshing, that they're finally taking a hard look inward and saying this needs to change. And I'm so upset that it took this woman losing her life for this change to happen. But I agree with the sentiment of the lawyer that it is historic change, and change in the military. The wheels of change in the military spin slow. So the fact that this has actually happened, I hate to say that I'm shocked, but I'm very, very relieved that it is finally come to fruition.
And it came to fruition not because of people in the military. It came to fruition because Vanessa Guillen's family never for a single second since the moment they found out she was missing, they never stopped. They fought and fought and fought. And I'm getting choked up talking about it because I follow her family on social media, and they are so still clearly like their lives will never be the same. She was so loved, and she was clearly such a wonderful person. But the whole family rallied and fought for her the whole way through. This is her sister, Lupe. I wish every family member out there will fight the same fight that we are today, because in 2 days, it's 1 year. And this is from at the year anniversary, they went to the Texas Capitol in Austin and they went to Washington, D.C. They went to the Texas State Capitol. They took these trips multiple times. Politicians, celebrities, everything. They multiple times protested right outside the gates of Fort Hood. They never stopped. And so this is an old quote, but she said, I wish every family member out there will fight the same fight that we are today, because in 2 days, it's 1 year. My frustration, my anger is the same, because it's not fair my sister was murdered the way she was. She had to be murdered for everyone to realize all of these issues. This has happened for decades. This is someone not in the military. And that's the quote that I wanted to get at. They had to fight. And sitting back last night, a decade ago when I was in, we lamented the way it was. And like I said before, decades before me, a fantastic, dedicated soldier who had wanted to join the Army since she was 10 years old. Her family talks about when she was a little girl, I want to be in the Army. I want to be in the Army. I want to be in the Army. A beloved sister, a daughter, a friend had to get brutally murdered with a hammer inside an armory, had to have her body dismembered with a knife, had to be missing for 2 months while no one in the Army was transparent with her family, who was begging for help. They had to lead the charge this whole way to get her found. They had to see the perpetrator get away and ultimately get away forever because of the way the case was handled. So they'll never see justice there. That's what had to happen for this to finally happen. And it is so overdue. And the Guillen family is just completely incredible to me. And her sister, Myra, said on Twitter, this feels so unreal. She was watching the press conference about it yesterday. My little sister shed light on the epidemic of sexual misconduct in the military. You'll never be forgotten. I miss you so much. I hope you're proud. They should be so incredibly proud, because what they have done. Sorry, I know so many women that I served with who have gone through sexual harassment and rape and things like that. And that they never got justice. And that we're still seen as a burden oftentimes instead of valuable members of the military, which we are. And it's just such a horrible injustice that this happened to her, and that she had to put up with sexual harassment from others before this happened to her when she was serving our country so well. And she's a hero, and so is her family.
When you first saw the news come across that the president was going to actually sign the legislation, can you kind of walk us through, Kate, like what your emotions were?
Finally. I just kept thinking, finally. And I also felt like when I was in, I just accepted the way things were so much. And I was so afraid. Like you saw a thing, like we would lament privately. It sucks that it's in our chain of command. Like I would never want to go to my sergeant or my staff sergeant or my captain and tell him if something happened to me, like, what the fuck? Like, but it never went outside that small talk. Like, I don't know. It was just relief. And I truly hope that this marks a very real change. We're sick of it and it can't continue. And one other thought that I had of moving this outside the chain of command, I promise you, just because there's so many more men in the military, I bet if you looked at the stats gender wise, I promise you, just based off numbers, more sexual assault happens to males in the military than to women. Maybe the ratio is different, but I promise you, if the thought of it coming forward is intimidating for me, I imagine the stigma of coming forward to your own command as a male is tenfold. And I bet you this going outside the command will be life-changing for thousands of males in the military too. I bet this will make a big difference.
That's it. I think this is finally something that can make a difference. I think the military's efforts to this point, with the SHARP program and some other initiatives, felt somewhat like a Band-Aid on a bullet wound that didn't really have any sort of impact because we saw this culture continue to be fostered. So I'm hopeful that this will affect actual change now.
Yep. Anyway, one last, the Guillen family, just absolutely incredible people. And I'm grateful for them. So.
Yep. It's nice to actually have something horrific happen and then you have good things that come from it. And you never want something horrific like what happened to Vanessa to happen to anyone else. But if it did happen, you got to capitalize and make change. And it seems like that we're at least but the legislation is just one step. It's a culture change that really needs to take place. But this type of thing helps it. And when the president,
it was a necessary step.
Congress acknowledges both sides, when both sides of Congress and the Senate can agree on something now, I think it's remarkable whenever that happens. Like we don't agree on shit. When both sides of the houses and the president can all agree that something needs to happen, the culture within the military is fucked up and we need to make big sweeping changes. Maybe now we're at the point where we can do that. And it makes you a better force. Like to me, like whenever you concentrate on these issues, women and men who are in units who are doing things that don't have to worry about being harassed or sexually assaulted, or if they do, they know that something's going to happen and there's going to be justice on the other end. It changes the way that you can fight and it changes the way that you approach work. Like when I think about these things now, I look back at my career and think about different things that I saw and that I was too cowardly or too ignorant to really know what was going on at the time. Because you look at groups like the Marine Corps and it's, in my mind, it is like the old boys club of old boys club, where you have certain elements of toughness. There's certain types of jokes. I mean, we talk all the time, military humor is darker than most humor that you're going to find anywhere else. And you see those types of things happen and take place in joking manner or inappropriate jokes. And you don't think about it at the time. I didn't. I thought this is just the way it is. For instance, when you would have a gunnery sergeant see a corporal walk by in the short, silky running shorts and would make an like, oh, I'm glad we're not wearing sweatpants today. Aren't you, Corporal? Like, and it's obviously about her ass. And you don't think about those things in the moment. Everybody kind of chuckles and laughs. And sometimes even the corporal will laugh along because what else was she supposed to do? Be that only person who's making the stand. And it's the culture of constant sexual harassment
that I remember so much of, like, talking about regrets. Like oh, Kate, you're cool. And they would talk shit about other women with me around. And I felt like if I don't politely chuckle, then they're going to turn on me too. And then I won't have anybody. And that was cowardice. That was cowardice. And I regret it a lot. And two, like, again, during Marines United, when they were sharing all those images,
because the nature of self-preservation is so strong.
And I've talked about, like, when that was going on and seeing nobody, I had a great command. My command wasn't toxic, but that it never got addressed. And like just me in uniform, they were posting these pictures on there and talking about, like, am I rape? Is she rapeable? Is she whatever? Like, blah, blah, blah. Like, the feeling of walking through the chow hall surrounded by hundreds of Marines and going, oh God, I bet all these guys are on that site. I bet all these guys share that stuff. Like, you can't trust anybody. Like, I hope that this starts to make a dent and stuff like that and change the way it is.
And I had some disturbing things and guys in the military still, and veterans in my DMs this past week. And if you're listening right now, you're still in the military, or you're a veteran, and you think that this in any way negatively impacts our military or makes us soft,
you need to take moron.
You need to take a very long look in the mirror, and you need to understand you are part of the problem, and you can change that. But this in no way softens us as a military. This in no way makes us a weaker military. We are ultimately going to become a stronger force because of this legislation, as we attempt to repair that culture that has plagued us for so long.